So this is a fabulous video to be making on a Friday afternoon, because today's Friday, today's payday. We're going to feel really fierce and lush and extravagant, and we're going to tell the truth about some ethical moments or ethical conflicts or ethical challenges that we've encountered while doing some form of practice that could be called social work with families or social work with victims of abuse, or somewhere in those zones. And we certainly have been around long enough. I'm almost 60, and my young and beautiful colleague over here, I think, is 57. So I'm older than her, but she's more gorgeous than me, especially today. Look at all that orange and lemon, ethics and lemon, very good. So, and Carlene is here today as someone who someday is going to have to face some of these ethical moments. We know it is inevitable in social work. You will have ethical dilemmas. That's a fact. You will have moments where you have to ethically compromise. You will have moments where you may feel ethically the best way to handle the situation is to lie, be subversive, do something sneaky on the side, stretch a boundary, go, oops, I'm a blonde. Was I supposed to fill that in? Oh my gosh. Right? We find maybe 10 trickster or the joker in the room. We may find different strategies, different moments during our careers. And every now and then, as Shelley and I know, there will be the moments, and we hope it doesn't happen to Carlene very often, but it may, because we can see she's an emotionally and intellectually and ethically creative and profoundly good-centered person. She's an old soul. She's actually an old soul. She will be fired. So that's the thing, right? Damn it, yeah. So said differently, I often do a little blah blah at the beginning of this September semester.
You're educated and thus wrong.
Yeah, you may have moments in your career. I would advise you, if you want to be ethically strong, be prepared to quit or be fired. And also marry someone rich. Further, probably best to have no kids or a car or a house, because you may have to move to another community to work.
That's why I live here.
Yeah, so there you go. Ha ha ha, marry rich. So the whole ethics thing in social work, again, a little bit of a preamble that if we think of social work as a profession that sometimes is about revolutionary social justice, that's one thing. And I would say maybe 20-30% of our profession is about that. I would say the rest of our profession is often about colluding with the federal, provincial, municipal government. And if someone is going to say back to me, Sai, you're wrong on that, and you're lying, I'll say back to them, hey, let's reflect on the residential schools. Let's reflect on the 60s scoop. Hey, let's reflect on all the moments where the social work profession was involved in oppressing gay, lesbian, and rainbow folk and putting them into institutions so that they could get shock therapy, for example, to cure them of their waywardness. There's lots of ways our profession has been in moments where when we look back on it, we think, oh, what were we doing as a collective group? Mm-hmm. Okay? So we give that preamble. We are stuck inside a complicated beast. The federal and provincial municipal government are usually only going to pay us to do things that are about organizing people, monitoring people, controlling people, that maybe nice, polite, white society, mainstream society would prefer to not see. So the alcoholics, the murderers, the incest victims, the people who are refusing to play nice with capitalism, patriarchy, colonization, racism, homophobia, all of those big structures that we know are a fact. You have to ask yourself, why would the brothers and the fathers pay us really, really well to undermine the brothers and the fathers with their agenda? Here's another example. The provincial government, when I first came to BC, when I first met Shally and was doing my work here, very soon after I arrived here, the Liberal government, they called themselves that, the Liberal government, Gordon Campbell and Christy Clark, they shut down 37 women's resource centers. You have to wonder why one of the first things they do when they get in power is to shut down or decapitate the women's movement in BC. Subsequent to that act, they then started corroding and subtracting social workers from all kinds of other zones. So first shut down the, let's say, mouthpiece of the resisting movement, and then you can get away with more bad behavior as a provincial government who is responsible for health care, education, housing, all of these kind of resources for vulnerable people. So I just want to make sure we say that right up front, that us three folks right here, we're very aware of the big structures that we are embedded within. Those of you who haven't had a chance yet to read Anne Bishop or Bob Mullally, they await you with their wonderful, powerful books. So Shelley has been doing all kinds of social work practice. Maybe you could just quickly list some of the agencies you've worked in or the type of zones, and then talk about some moments where you thought, oh, this is ugly, this is stinky, this is bad ethically, and maybe some little stinkette moments that you resisted in a way, and then maybe big stinky barfy moments that you resisted in a different way.
Okay, well, just a couple of statements. As going through the training for social work, the one thing that I think has become part of my armor is buying into the social work code of ethics. It gave me a structure, it gave me principles, it gave me a way to analyze a situation. In school, the ethics course gave us models, for instance, to run a problem through.
Okay.
After a while, that becomes second nature. You don't need to look it up in the book anymore and run your template. But it gave me a way that I could grasp on to problem solving ethically.
Yeah.
Because within our industry, it's huge cases of ethics are breached all the time. So we have to, first of all, one of my big saviors in realize, because it can be damaging, when you figure out that the industry you're in is doing damage to people, and the reason you're trying to have a career is to fix the damages, and then you start analyzing your own industry for the problems and the pain and suffering it has visited on the client group we're trying to help. That can be overwhelming. And we lose our voice to speak to that. I think it's important when we learn the fact that social work has had its troubles.
Yeah.
Social work began maybe with the best of intentions through the SPCA, right? Way back. We had more consideration for animals' rights than we did for children's rights. Children's welfare systems evolved out of the SPCA piece. We've learned along the way. It's true. We've learned along the way, and we've developed and we've morphed the industry. And I think that the part of me that clings to the feminist structural social work, the feminist ethics, is that entity, that movement. The feminist movement has now into its fourth wave, they say, or whatever.
It's all kinds of waves. There's a whole bunch of wavinesses.
But the thing is that we've grown and evolved. We somebody called us out. Hey, it's mostly white women telling here things that brown women or black women. I mean, this isn't the way it is for those particular women.
Yeah.
Burning the bra wasn't available for everybody to do.
Yeah.
Right. So as feminism evolved, I think about that in the same way social work.
Yeah.
Social workers are evolving. We're recognizing residential school's not the way to go.
Yeah.
Although there was no social work involved in that. But if we can recognize the faults, and then we can fix them.
Yeah.
And the ethics that uphold our fight is what gets us through it. Because what we're fighting is a breach of those ethics at the core. Even if you're not consciously thinking of a particular statement in, say, the Code of Ethics, you know deep down that this is not right, that this isn't working.
So we have our idealized Code of Ethics, and then each agency or context we work in has its idealized pamphlet.
Absolutely.
But then in the day-to-day, a very classic example, we've all heard of these stories, is some social worker doing child protection kind of stuff or family counseling kind of stuff, and they might have 120 case files or something. There's no possible way they can regularly meet with every single member of that family and truly do depthful work when you have that many clients. So from the get-go, you get hired, you're given too many clients, and then you just hope that no baby dies on your watch, or no man murders his wife on your watch, or whatever. But you also know that you really aren't being your ethical best self because you just simply cannot be. Because you have too much on the go. And these are especially, we have a video on northern and rural context.
Yes, yeah.
It's very difficult if you're working in a northern context and you have to drive 5 hours that way or 2 hours this way to see that client, and that one 2 hours that way. So not only are you given more clients than you could possibly see, and see in a really meaningful, rich, substantive way, but you often even have to call them and say, I'll be there in 3 weeks from now on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. So you're letting them know when you're going to be there. So you're not really doing spot checks to see on their parenting, because if they had the kid chained in the basement, they took the chains off for that day.
Absolutely.
Right? So we know from the get-go that there's the ideal of our code of ethics, there's the ideal of what each agency says they do or wish that they do, and then there's the wish that we each have each day when we go to work, and then there's what happens, right?
And there's levels of it. So you have where you think an actual policy is breaching an ethics. Right? That's pretty black and white. You can read this, you can analyze it. That's not going to actually do any good to empower the client, and in fact it's going to oppress them.
Yes.
A little example of that little $25 food card, right? But there's, what I find is most of the ethical dilemmas come within the personalities of the workers. So they're breaching things that are obvious, that you can put something in black and white that you're not supposed to do, but are, an individual's lack of ethics lets them abuse clients. All right, I've seen co-workers having sex with clients.
Yeah.
It was happening from when I first started school. One of the practicum students I went to school with, she was placed at a school. She was placed at a high school for her practicum, year 1, and she's having sex with one of the teachers in the janitorial closet. Okay, that's shit. Ethics. That had nothing, nobody wrote that, of course, that's not allowed. That teacher was totally taking advantage of a young girl fresh in a course who was very probably swept up by the power that man was presenting in front of her, and the fact that, someone in his position took special attention to her. When he was just getting her to suck dick in a closet. I mean, really?
Oh!
It is what it is, and that's what gets me so freaking mad. As I recover from sexual abuse and those kind of horrors that happen in my life, when I come in contact, and it's different when it's client work, when it's a co-worker, when it's like
so
a
each
student.
story of ethical complication, it requires profound pondering, observation, information collection, double checking our own radars and intuitions and our own knowledge base, maybe consultation with one of our peers who's outside of the situation.
Absolutely.
To see that we're really not overreacting or underreacting, because it can get very incremental. Things can happen with a little sneaky moment, another moment, and over a 1-year period, let's say, and you don't know, is that person being racist, or am I over imagining, or right? So those are some of the steps that we've learned. Always do those things. Ponder, observe, take notes, get consultation outside of the agency, double check with the person who might be in the closet with the guy having sex, or, right? And do the best you can to collect lots of information.
It is how we, in earlier videos you've done about talking about the self-care, your own therapy. What happened there, what you just witnessed in this video, was me emotionally reacting to the triggers of my previous sexual abuse. When I see something like that go on in front of me, man, instant poof, the emotion is there. But that's what drives me. But now I have education, and I know how to simmer that. I know how to take it and ask the professional how to review it, how to walk it through a problem-solving method. I have all of those in my toolkit now. I think I don't apologize for any emotional reaction that I may have, but I also put it in check right away.
And knowing what's your stuff, Her
It's
stuff,
important.
his stuff, the
Yeah.
organization stuff, their stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So that, that was so crazy for me as a student, even though I was 40 and had lived through a lot of this kind of treatment. That was so shocking to me to visit it in the industry.
Right, because we have an imagining. I think that's, we've talked before about how perpetrators can groom situations, and grooming can happen at the micro, meso, or macro level, and it can be longitudinal, so that people have been groomed to think, well, a priest could never sexually abuse a little boy. Priests are very ethical and tender and good. Or a cop couldn't abuse an indigenous woman that he had picked up for drunkenness because he's a cop, and cops are meant to be trusted. Or
he couldn't have assaulted a police chief. He's a police chief, and that cop doesn't need to use force on a 60-year-old.
Right, exactly. So that, like, trying in every moment, we've been as a collective, as a group of people, but then in social work, we tend to draw a crowd who we long to idealize as a social work profession.
Absolutely.
I long
100%.
to believe in good people.
Yeah.
I desperately long to believe that the executive director of an agency, or let's say the dean at UNBC, or
Well, that is a perfect example. I mean, what was his name? Young?
Dr. Young.
Dr. Young. So here he is running an agency, and it was so widely known. He's racist, sexist, homophobic, all of those things. And yet he's in power.
Yeah.
So then you wonder, how does that happen? And because he's good at what he does.
Yeah.
Right? So he's able to do that psychological violence that abusers are so good at in deflecting away from themselves.
Yeah.
And bringing up other conversations. And but so here he is in power. And then, stuff happened at UNBC where he was removed, is my understanding.
Well, he was at UNBC. My memory of this is he was at UNBC, and there was a lot of bathroom talk among women, and there were a lot of situations where people said, I don't know, he seems to be heavy-handed, or he seems to be making choices that don't match our faculty association agreement. And then he got, in a way, promoted to an even more amazing opportunity, working for being the CEO of the Museum for Human Rights, which is a place that is to be celebrating indigenous culture, gay, lesbian, rainbow folk. All the oppressed groups were using their art to talk about a better world. And so he gets promoted, as you've been saying, he gets promoted to being this, and then he eventually gets outed, and he's recently been forced to resign. And in a lot of ways, that's totally classic social work. I want to believe, and you want to believe in the dean, the principal at the school, the teachers at the school. You want to believe that Catholic priests are who they say they are. You want to believe that Judge Ramsey is a good, fair
That's
judge.
another good example.
You want to believe that people in power
Wouldn't abuse it.
Wouldn't abuse it, that they are tender, ethical, honorable, righteous people. But then ongoingly we have those ethical moments where we witness something in our agencies or among our colleagues, and it gives us this kind of, oh my God, did I really see what I just saw, or did I just hear what I just hear, or is this how this is really going to go?
Absolutely. I mean, man, there's just I just have so many examples. He is somebody, though, that was in a lot of power within my spectrum because I was a student. Right, and I'm just grateful I ended up with teachers, in front of teachers, like what would it be like to learn about victims of abuse from this person?
Yeah.
And I understand he's got quite a fundamentalist religious background as well. So how does he get promoted? How does he end up in these, and I think he's just a master manipulator, and I think it works that way with all, not just like frontline victims, let's call them. He does it with bureaucracy, but men in power want men in power, and they want like-minded people. So he made the right people, probably people like him, feel comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so they had a certain safety net.
Judge Ramsey, for 10 years, my understanding, he was a judge here in Prince George, sexually abusing in often really horrific, gruesome ways
terrible.
young girls who had come before him in the courts. And apparently there were at least 2 police officers. The rumor mill goes, from the grassroots folk that we work with, that there were at least 2 police officers who knew about it and who were somehow involved. and the files for the 2 police officers kind of got lost, and then they aged out, like the files weren't acted upon for 2 years or something, and then they couldn't act upon them.
Statute of limitations ran out on it or something.
So these are
It got misfiled. Something was a cam was turned off, or
right. A camera's turned off, a body camera, those kind of stories. And so we in social work, because I've known you so long, you've shared with me some of those moments of what's the best choices within this terrain, what's the best way to respond. Because sometimes the best strategy is hold our breath, collect data, take notes, wait till we've kind of got all our facts and our information. I garden outside, and I've learned that Clover and I aren't getting along. And there's something about clover. There's like millions of freaking clovers. So my urge is to try and get them, but now I'm getting wiser and older in my gardening life. I wait till they're about this tall, because then I can find the whole center and the stalk, and when I pull it, I get the roots.
Why didn't you just learn to love clover?
Right, why did I just look the other way?
There's a reason she likes cats.
Exactly. So now that's kind of the brilliance of aging, coming to our full-grown selves, our older selves, our elder selves in the profession, to be able to hold back sometimes till the clover is high enough that I can reach in and grab the whole thing and pull it out by the root. Because
sadistic fuck we are.
Yeah, because you know sometimes if you've just got a tiny impression or a tiny glimpse of something and you react to it, it's very easy for them to turn that on us and say, well, you're overreacting, you're a hysterical person, you're incompetent, you're unprofessional, you have poor judgment. 3 times in my career I've had that thrown at me in some kind of memo of you have poor judgment. And my now wiser judgment is, I'm just waiting. You just stick your little dirty clover head up tall enough so that I can get the whole thing, right? And then throw it back into the world to say, okay, and therefore that person needs to be fired, or and therefore that person needs to be demoted or punished or sent to a 6-week retraining program or something, right? So tell me 1 or 2 moments that would be instrumental for students in family counseling or in social work and victims of abuse. What could you offer them of some stories where you kind of the beginning, the middle, the end, where they can remember that story and go, I'm going to remember what Shelley taught me.
All right. To be quite honest, a lot of the ethics that I've challenged have resulted in me walking away from the situation, that there was not enough remedy in place by the institutions themselves.
Okay.
They talked the talk, they did not walk the walk when it came down to how the entity itself could cope with the situation. Because ethics is not about black and white. It's about all the gray area that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, ethics are about life and death.
Sometimes, yeah.
And in this last, I have spent a year engrossed in an ethical dilemma where I felt somebody was not where they should be in terms of, the facility.
Okay.
So they were locked down in a facility.
Okay.
However, they really, at first when I got there, told about the situation, and you're trying to offer support, but you start realizing that person shouldn't be here.
Okay.
How are we gonna get this person out? And let me tell you, as an agency, I had support that we all labeled the ethical dilemma easily.
Okay.
But a team of us could not move that system to get that person out of there for over a year.
Okay.
So that person remained in a lockdown situation for a year.
Okay.
Imprisoned because, that's a strong word, but it is.
In incarceration, whether it was in a
wasn't in a
psychiatric
jail,
institution or an elderly place or group home or whatever. So what we would wish a student to take from that is sometimes we can pretty quickly figure out the ethics of the situation, we can very quickly sometimes get allies to be with us in seeing the situation the same way we do. But then the challenge for, let's say, a younger person in the profession is, how can I get them somewhere else? And it may be that there is no somewhere else. It may be that we can't get the funding to get to somewhere else. It may be sometimes they have one variable in their life story. I'm thinking of an elderly person's story that I heard of, where it was an elderly man, very cranky, very rageful, very abusive, in a wheelchair, and he had an addiction issue. So we had a situation where the hospital didn't want to take him in because he was verbally and physically abusive. He couldn't go to an elder care place like, let's say, Gateway, because he was so abusive and hostile and wouldn't follow any rules and so on. So because of his abusive, if he was not abusive, we could have found him 10 places.
Right.
If he wasn't in a wheelchair because he needed wheelchair accessibility, we could have found him 10 places. Right? But just the configuration, the interconnection of the intersectionality of all his troubles made it impossible. And I don't know what happened to him. This was a story where a practicum student was coming to me all the time telling me how this one story kept getting stuck. And she spent pretty much all her practicum trying to figure out what are we going to do. And then her practicum ended, so I don't know what happened. Maybe he's still sitting in that hallway, right? His diaper needed to be changed. So it just becomes impossible. There will, at least once in your career, there will be a story where it is impossible. So our task then is to deal with our rage and grief and frustration and get on with the day. Because
Absolutely.
That's it.
That is so hard to do sometimes, you know, when you
Self-care.
you have somebody breaking down. I've been in rooms where, you know, staff have ran out of the room crying because of in this particular situation, people realizing this person is locked up, you know, and they you know, what are we doing? Are we oppressing this person? And then you start thinking about yourself as the oppressor.
Yeah.
And then how do you protect yourself from going to that level? And yet you're engaging.
Yeah.
I am part of the system that is controlling this man's freedom.
Yeah.
What can I do? At structural social work, looking at feminism principles, working with the collective, engaging in all of the supports that you have as a worker to help, and never giving up.
Right, never giving up.
Never giving up.
You still got to get up the next morning and try and show up at work and try to be emotionally present.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that is unethical, and that's a very common, I would say statistically common in our profession, that people after a year or 10 or 20, they become emotionally dead. They're zombies in social work who...
That's a good title for a book.
Yeah, they you know, like, yeah, fill in the form, I don't care, return the phone call, I don't care. They get to a place where emotionally, which is our tools for our trade, our emotional attunement and empathy and alertness, and then acting on that in the world. Like, I'm looking at the situation, I see this person is really sad. But if you're a zombie in social work, you're like, so who cares if they're sad? They just get on with their day, right? So we don't want that. We don't want to be zombies. We don't want to be cowards. We don't want to be apathetic.
And we don't want to succumb.
We don't want to succumb or just surrender and admit defeat. You know, like, so this person is locked up for a year or 10. I admit defeat because my boss told me to. We want to be all the other ways of being ethically courageous, available, tenacious, robust, risk-taking sometimes. Could you tell me of a moment where you had to go to the wall, where you either quit or got fired? And I know you have stories of moments, and if you need to change some details, because again, go back to our video on social work in rural and small communities, right? Yeah.
I'm just trying to select which one. Okay.
Yikes.
Sorry, but that's just how it kind of goes, right? Like, With in sticking with the same story I was talking about earlier, so how do we get to, how do I as a social worker identifying a structural issue that's imposed on somebody else? Turned out how I dealt with it is the ethics guidance. So we are giving ethical decision making, problem solving models. And so I was able to gather a group of my cohorts, like all the people I worked with, and I sent them on an email with the model.
Okay.
Please, we're going to have this meeting. I would like everybody to take the time to put a couple of comments in every single piece of the breakdown of breaking down this problem. So
Okay, so putting an invitation into the world to collect information from others in the workplace, getting kind of specific, detailed information collaborative information that isn't just from one person, but from different disciplines too, because there may have been in some stories, sometimes there's a nurse or a doctor or a teacher or an assistant, or there can be other people who've seen things who aren't even from social work, but the thing they saw or the thing they know or the thing they can bear witness to is very, very useful to what you're trying to accomplish.
absolutely, absolutely, and I think and this was an interdisciplinary group of people I organized because that's important in ethics, because it isn't black and white, because it is gray. There usually is one person making the decision ultimately in the work environment. So, but it's important for that one person to be supported properly to make that decision. So if I'm the social worker, but I'm not the head of the agency, then my role is to support the head of the agency by collecting information for them and doing it through this
kind
committee.
of enrich the file, so when it's in front of them, they can go, oh, obvious, this is what has to happen, because you've built the case, let's say.
Right, so this is what a care aide said. This is what a security guard said. This is what a nurse said.
The bus driver. For kids,
here's what the family member said. So it's important that data is collected with outside of your own professional, if possible, right? If possible. So collecting that, putting it all down in writing, putting things in writing really, it kind of solidifies things. It makes it harder for the people that can make that do the decision making. It makes it harder for them to ignore the problem. And so that's one of the sort of the
superpower of our profession. Create your paper trail.
There's purpose in it, right? And so after that, and then realizing all the different perspectives, what we decided is we need to do more advocacy. We need to push back on the legislation. We need to push back on the rules. We need to push back on the hierarchy that's holding this situation in place for way too long. Well, we you know what it took? It took the right mouthy person to just say, what? This is ridiculous. This is a breach of ethics. No more. Boom, boom, boom. Done.
Okay.
Right?
So sometimes getting somebody else, giving them all the information to, let's say, the head of nursing or something, and then they go to the social worker and say, well, this has to change. The head of social work, right? So sometimes you're just kind of, there used to be a British comedy, and it was called Yes Minister. I don't know if any of you
have seen that. Yes.
So there was an administrative guy behind the scenes, and the whole show, every episode was, he would set up a whole sequence of people and events and conversations so that at the end of the show it was like a domino. He'd hit one domino and it would go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then the minister would come and say to him, you should do this because I think it's a good idea. And he'd say, yes, minister. So the show would almost always end with him saying, yes, minister. So sometimes in social work, that's the imagination and the creativity and the sort of sparkle where you can get other people or situations, not to say we're being manipulative, but we're inviting them to be their best selves.
I think you need to be totally honest. You need to be able to stand behind your value system and whatever the code ethic is that you're following, and you need to stand firmly because you will be challenged on it. Absolutely. I had a situation where at UNBC, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about it. All I know is that there was sexual inappropriate activity between a client and worker. When I brought that this is how I believe in problem solving. Gets me hired at every job interview too. Well, I first go talk to the person I have the problem with.
Yeah.
And I let them know that. So if I know somebody's behaving inappropriately sexually, how hard is that conversation?
Yeah.
So what I did was, guess what? We're in the same ethics course. Let's do the assignment for problem solving together. And let's use your situation and run it through the model.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what I did in that situation. And at the end I looked and I said, now you know I have to report you. The model says I have to report this.
Yeah, you don't blame yourself.
Don't blame myself. But then when I reported it, I was told there was no remedy at the administration level.
Yeah.
So what do I do with that? They said, well, we would like you to blaze the trail and take it on personally, one-on-one against this person. I'm like, no. You guys figure this out. I am not your guinea pig. Get your frickin' policies in order. And I made that statement to the powers that be.
Yeah.
But I also was one of my big learning lessons on how to use the ethic decision-making process to my advantage.
Right.
I've used it many times since then. And so I find it a very good working tool as a social worker to refer to my code of ethics and to refer to whatever problem-solving tool is provided. The medical system has a different problem-solving tool than, say, a social work system.
Right.
But they all come to the same conclusions in the end. So I would highly recommend paying attention when you're taking your ethics courses.
Yeah.
And rely on those models a little bit. You know, they may,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes we're hesitant to new learning, but they've been very effective for me. Part of being the social worker, if you're the only social worker in an environment, you're in a multidisciplinary environment, you're probably the only one with the code of ethics that you walk by.
Yeah.
And that becomes a very big challenge. You think people are your allies and stuff, but when it comes down to nitty-gritty stuff, they don't really think you should confront somebody in power having sex with somebody who's brand new at an agency, or a simple ethical dilemma. I was in I was working and we had a program where we bought food for addicted women who were pregnant. And we could give gift cards out to, give gift cards out, but we had a pantry that we supplied. And the funder sent the money, how the money got dispersed was through gift cards. So a staff would take like a $250 gift card to Superstore, they'd buy all these bulk goods, they'd break them down, and women could get food packages once a week. There was a lot of, I could spend the whole frickin' 10 hours on this story, but the management was abusive, unethical, there was physical violence at the work site, there was stalking, harassing, bullying, there was, you name it, it happened there. And part of how it all started to unravel was the ED, who was the abusive person, had gone away on an out-of-trip town for the agency, and we had to go and buy the groceries. So me and another staff, we go to the grocery store and the gift card's empty. There's no balance on it. So we're like, oh, sorry, we got like $250 worth of groceries, can't pay for them. So as soon as I get back, I phone the number. Oh, it turns out that gift card was just used down in Vancouver. Who's down in Vancouver right now? The ED, okay? So it turned out there was a number of empty gift cards, right? So it took a full year to get that agency to get any kind of, let's say, total satisfaction from the, that's a small story in there. But here is somebody who's not in the social work profession. They come from a criminology background.
Okay.
And so you would think, but they also used to run another agency here in town where they stole money from it. There was sex with clients going on. There was so much, and they got fired. They left town for a little bit, came back, and here they are running another show.
Wow.
It's like this guy. How the hell do these people get to be in these places of power?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But
if I go back to I think in the video we made on grooming, we were talking about the predators go where there's good meals for them.
Absolutely.
Right? So the Catholic priest we often go like, how could a Catholic priest become an abuser of little boys? But if you step back and you say, well, if I was a predator, if I was a pedophile, I'm going to go looking for a place where I could hang out with little boys and sexually abuse them and get away with it over and over and over.
And where I'm given blind trust.
Where I'm given blind trust. I think I'll become a Catholic priest. So, or I think I'll become a cop. Right? You know, there are situations. We have good mind and good spirit and good soul and good ethics and good mindfulness. We don't have that kind of a creepy
Thought
process, right? But then, of course, snakes do snake things, and crocodiles do crocodile things, and they're going to go where they get what makes crocodiles happy.
And they dress in the sheep's clothing.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so among us, if there's one of them among us, we are urged, and this is, I really want students to get this because it'll break your heart. The first 2 or 20 times somebody did a bad thing in our profession, I was designed, my nature was designed to think, well, I must have misunderstood that, right? I must be confused about something here.
Or something happens and you immediately think that you're the problem.
I'm the problem. Right. Versus saying, oh, look, there's a crocodile amongst us, and he's doing crocodile shit, right? Like, right?
Yeah.
I wish the students to, not to be paranoid. Our profession is filled with really good souls doing amazing things, who often work more hours than they're paid for, and who take, you know, they bring muffins for their clients, and they organize the Christmas party on their own time, and all that stuff. But there are some among us who are the worst of human character.
I would say they're not the majority, but there's enough of them that your work experience is you're gonna find
You're going
one.
to find them.
They're
going to
everywhere.
find you. And they may even come gunning for you because they will see you're the person who has the potential to stand up to them.
Absolutely.
You're the
You're a threat.
person. You're at first, like I remember so many moments in my life where I'm just looking at someone and really looking and really thinking, and then asking some questions and asking some more questions and thinking. And I'm making notes and I'm thinking, right? And then I'm thinking, it must be me, as you said, Carly. You know, it must be that I'm misunderstanding this. But as I'm doing that, looking and looking, they're looking at me, looking at them. And they're thinking, trouble. Look, they're looking at me, trouble, because I could disclose about them. And then as you go further in your career and you're known as, I put my father in jail for sexually abusing, right? So people are like, oh, she's one of those, right? Oh, she's the kind of person that if I beat my wife, someday she'll come after me, right? That they come to, just as they can, as the predator wolf can smell the wounded sheep, they also can smell, if I'm the sheep dog, let's say, right? You know, I'm a sheep dog, I'm watching you, right?
Do you think that teacher, the earlier story I told about my friend, the practicum student, she was a young girl, 20, 21 years old, in front of that teacher, and he convinced her to, you know, have sex with him during the practicum. He knew which practicum student would be vulnerable.
Oh, right.
You know?
Exactly. In the grooming video, we talk about that. We've talked about that in different ways in almost all the videos, is the people who do bad things, they learn how to disguise themselves, they learn how to cover up, they learn how to lie so well that when I lie about the littlest thing, like, I mean, if let's say a friend of mine says, do you want to go shopping on Saturday? And I say, no, I have marking to do. And my face turns purple. Really, I just want to watch TV on Saturday or something, right? But I lie about it. And then I feel so bad that I'll like, oh, you know, I'll buy you gifts, I'll take you to lunch because I feel ashamed that I lied to my friend, right? But these people can lie so brilliantly, whether it's Judge Ramsey or the Epstein, or, you know, any of these abusers out there who've been magnificent, and they're practiced at it. They've lied 10 million times. I've only lied like once a year about Saturday.
Well, that, and I mean, they don't have to. Like, if you're in a position of power like that and you've learned how to manipulate people, you've conditioned everyone around you to automatically assume that they've caused you to behave that way.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Victim blame. Victim blame.
Victim
Or I have
blaming.
poor judgment. Or you're overreacting.
So
Or
like
you're
even
too
if
sensitive.
exactly. So like even if I overreact, your first reaction would be like, oh, I probably said something that offended her.
I am supporting somebody right now, very close to me. In social work, we never drop our hats at the end of the day. Who's in an abusive work environment and a toxic work environment,
Yeah.
and the reactions that my loved one
Yeah.
is having are typical victim reactions.
Right. Right.
You
Abused
know?
wife reactions. Abused daughter.
In a
that-
toxic work environment, and the toxic abusive employer will one day say, oh, I had such a rough weekend, my boyfriend, and say all the boyfriend problems,
Right.
and make her feel like she's well
Colluding or
respected,
connected or
with this boss and stuff, and then all of a sudden, and feels important, right? And then the boss will ignore her, and then the boss starts
ambiguous attachment disorder or something triggering
something like
that.
you just finished telling me the deepest, darkest secrets, and now you're saying I don't get to know about a safety report. But this person also yells and degrades and will throw things on the desk, and so she'll the honeymoon cycle, the tension building stage, the eruption of the abuse. My loved one has been living that cycle for a full year, and she is a mess right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she, I love that, part of my healing journey is I've overcome a lot of abuse, and it's made me streetwise,
Yeah.
right? Whereas people who haven't had to endure a lot of abuse may not have that.
Yeah.
So their ability to recognize the abuse, their ability to be sucked down, it's my fault,
Yeah.
more than, and misread it, and always, she's, the abuser is very effective.
Yeah.
Lateral violence, yelling at me in front of other people,
To
so that I
discredit
won't
me,
be.
to groom you, to make you feel diminished in front of witnesses, and to feel ashamed.
Well, and you
or
don't dare
incompetent.
take your boss on in front of other people.
Right.
So they structure the abuse in a way of where they're going to put the abuse out. Now,
Yeah.
whatever's going on in this boss's personal life is infiltrating into how she's doing her managing.
Yeah.
And she is crushing somebody else, and sometimes abusers don't even know they're abusive.
Right.
Sounds
Right,
like
so
most
that's-
minimum wage jobs.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, every
This is
minimum
not.
wage job has somebody sooner or later who's awful like that. But we don't expect it in the social work profession. We don't expect it in a place where we're all supposed to follow these codes of ethics. We're all taught to be kind, responsible, truthful, authentic, all this stuff. So you tend to, I've been told so many times in my jobs, that this, when you get hired, they say, your boss is here to mentor you. If you have any troubles, you come to your boss and they'll help you. They'll guide you through it, right? And then
And
then
they're
as
so
you get,
unavailable.
right. Or right, they're so unavailable. They say, oh, yeah, we've had some stories lately about that with technology. So that's part of the shock, and I guess I'm wishing for students in social work with victims of abuse or in family counseling to know, one, at least once in your career you'll have an ethical dilemma. At least once in your career you'll be lied to by bosses and colleagues. At least once you'll have somebody abusive like this who may not realize they're being abusive, but they are.
But they are.
Further, you'll have, the pattern is that often the people around us don't know how to step up or can't step up because they're a single mom with 3 kids and they need this job and they're so frightened, or there's so many reasons that for each of us, as we bring this video more to a close, that each of us realizes everything from our ethics courses and our code of ethics, it's real and it is something you'll need someday, so pay attention.
Exactly.
And write stuff down. Think of like this Clover thing.
Always
where,
write things down. Date, time,
who
quick
was there,
one
what
minute
they
point.
said,
Who's
exactly.
there, what was said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Collect your evidence. Like with the clover, you want to wait till the roots are big enough that you can grab the whole thing, you can get your hand around it.
Mm-hmm.
Collect your data, your affirmation. Be bold, but be wisely bold or be cunningly bold. And don't imagine that you can just go directly sometimes. You can't go directly to the wolf and say, well, I've noticed you're a wolf.
Yeah.
And I think you should fire yourself, oh wolf person.
But
Dang, I can't believe no one's thought of this idea before.
With that, with that abusive employer I was involved with that was stealing money from the company, they did a lot more. Whenever they realized somebody was catching on to them, they slowly, out of 23 people when I hired on, when I left, 5 people, and they were the closest friends and family of the ED, right? Hired uneducated, unqualified people into well-paying jobs that were clinically based. Like, what are you doing hiring that person's not a nurse?
Right.
You're supposed to hire a nurse.
Right.
What are you doing hiring somebody without an admin degree? This person doesn't know how to answer the friggin' 6-line phone system. But you love her because she's your grandma or something,
Your personal connection isn't a qualification.
But when I talk about documenting, I mean things like this. I would go into my office and I'd go to sit down and I noticed my chair was either lower or higher.
So somebody
had been in my office, was on my computer, and then that's the first time I realized in learning, because databases, computers, all that's, last 10, 15 years, I realized they were going in and they could change my notes.
Wow.
They could go in and make changes to my notes, which happened.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I had to, so I started documenting.
Keeping something a little separate.
Just keeping something separate. Now, there was physical violence, unfortunately, in this workplace, but this person cornered me and wasn't going to let me out of the door. I'd have fucking drilled her. I would have. I would have if push come to shove. Yeah. And I think she probably realized I'd just bowl her right over too. But in that moment, I had to think like a victim because I'm being put in a corner and not allowed out a door.
Yeah.
And then it happened again. 3 times in one day, she cornered me and basically was berating me and saying terrible things to me. And it turned out somebody was, and I wrote down dates. Turned out somebody was down on, and one of the incidents happened in a stairwell.
Yeah.
And there was somebody in the basement floor coming up the stairwell that the ED did not know. Yeah, they heard it. They had written a note. Right? And then there was, what else was happening is this, I was being like severely harassed and bullied. So if I got a phone call from, I don't know, let's call her Mary. Mary gives Shelley a phone call. The admin person she hired, that's her relative, was writing a little sticky note. Shelley got a call from Mary. She was on the phone for 8 minutes, and she'd go put that sticky note on the ED's desk.
Wow.
Well, it accumulated. There was a number of them, so other staff had come in and went, oh, that's interesting, and they wrote notes about her frickin' notes. So when it came down for me to tell my story,
as you say this sounds so crazy. I could imagine
so
a fourth-year
true.
social work student going, "What? These things happen. I'm sorry, my little flowers."
These things happen.
These things happen. Our profession has some crazy people or people who do crazy things, or people who get burnt out or overwhelmed, and/or going back to our video on interdisciplinarity and our video on the North. Sometimes interdisciplinary can mean someone who isn't a social worker, who doesn't have a BSW or an MSW, can end up being your executive director.
With a diploma.
With a diploma.
Some other field.
In some other field. And or somebody who's been in that spot for 20 years keeps getting promoted and they've become the zombie social worker. They're dead inside and they've moved up the hierarchy. So you're being hired and you're actually, in lots of ways, the wisest, bravest person in the room because on the issues we're talking about, feminist family counseling or social work with victims of abuse, the people who graduated 20 years ago have a very different take sometimes on how to care for incest issues, how to respond to wife assault. We have to remember that. We have to remember that. There are still people out there in the world right now in our profession who believe that if a daughter's been sexually abused by her dad, if you get dad to go for some counseling, you get girl to go for counseling, then you just put the family all back together and it's all love and wholesomeness. Personally, as a feminist, I don't believe that. I don't believe that daughter can ever feel fully safe in that family.
I can give you a good story, something
something
similar
like
to
that,
that.
yeah.
So there was an accusation of a dad abusing a young girl. And I was new with this at this place, and I got invited into a meeting that was going to be a family meeting. Now, in my social work training, you don't put the victim and the abuser together for counseling because it risks, okay? So I questioned this to begin with, but I sat in the room and I watched and I stood by and I didn't walk out of the room, and parts of me want to relive this, believe me, parts of me wants to relive this, and I had to be what's called the whistleblower. That's another whole conversation, that piece of it. But I'm new at the agency. I've only been there 3 weeks literally, and I'm in a room with 3 children, the mom, the dad's been accused, 2 other people from the facility, a credible complaint was put in by the daughter towards the father. My co-worker said to the daughter, "Are you afraid of your dad?"
Dad is right there!
Dad is right there.
Looking at
And
them.
went to each child and made that conversation long ago.
Yeah.
However, when I
Yeah.
left the room, what do I do with this? I just feel icky.
So let me just insert this in case it's somebody who's just coming to these conversations. You always interview the children separately.
Absolutely.
In a very safe and tender way. You try to ask, let's say, sideways questions. You don't come right at them. So did your dad ever sexually abuse you?
That was being said right in the room that day.
And you don't have the dad in the room because they're going to feel afraid to say it in front of dad. They're afraid they're going to get punished later. And often dad has said things like, if you ever tell, I'll kill your puppy. If you ever tell, I'll beat your mama. So we know you never ask these kind of questions in front of the alleged perpetrator. You individually interview the kids. You do it in a really good, safe way. Ideally, you do it with a video camera on. There's a whole bunch of protocols that were not followed in this story. And further, not that we're against praying or anything like that, but the spiritual stuff is not what you bring into the room when we're talking about dads raping and invading their children's bodies. That's maybe later in the kids' healing, you talk individually with each kid, you talk about what spirituality means to them, or faith, or God, or whatever. But it's not seen as, let's say, medicine to bring in the room while the alleged perpetrator is right there.
Here's the other thing. The older child didn't know a complaint had been made and found out in that room in that moment. Now, how hard was that for that? But that is abusing that child. We talk about our agencies wanting to do the best results, family unification. That's the purpose. And then we've just endangered the child, the wife. That was on our shoulders. Now, at the time, I was told this is how they do things. It's different than what you've been taught at school. This is a new way. But I left there just feeling gross.
No,
but
that's actually like a
1,000-year-old
way. It's called the way of the fathers and the patriarchy and the way of keeping vulnerable kids trapped in families where bad things are going on. This is just
a couple of things out of that.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. And I was one of 3 workers in the room, and my case note looked like this. The other 2 entries, and especially the one that did the asking, had 2 sentences about an hour's meeting where sexual abuse was deeply discussed. And I knew when writing my case note I'd be blowing the whistle in doing that.
Yeah.
But I also knew if our case notes were seconded by the legal system, the perpetrator would win because of what we did in that room. Right. We have tainted the children's testimony.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So we have actually helped the perpetrator. Not only did we continue in the abuse at that level, we helped the perpetrator if he ever got in front of a courthouse.
Right.
So there was all this stuff running through my head. I'm 3 weeks into the job. Thankfully.
In the room, when it comes to homophobia, trans issues, racism, classism, sexual abuse, incest, wife, so often the students we're graduating right now
with the ideals.
You're the smartest person in the friggin' building, the most ethical person in the building, and you might be the most scared person in the building because you're the person recently hired. The person who's been the executive director. I had one, maybe we'll conclude with this one little story. I had a student who, UMBC has been here now for 25 years. We're kind of a new opportunity on the train. But there are people who got hired before UMBC existed who had a 2-year college diploma in criminology or something like that. And here in the north, they were really keen for these kind of people. There were a lot of jobs and not a lot of people who had a master's degree in social work.
Mm-hmm.
So I have met many people who, and this one in particular, her bosses, her board, let's say, forced her to go back to school because now there was a university, and they said to her, okay, you've been working here for a long time, but now that UMBC is here, we'll pay part of your tuition. You have to go back and get your BSW. She didn't really want to. So she would be sitting in classes, and she even said in front of other people, she'd say things like, to me, and she was taking this course, Social Work with Victims of Abuse, and she sat at the back with her arms like this, and she would say things like, I don't have to take this from someone like you. I've been working in this field for decades. She said that out loud in front of other students, right? And she believed in the prayer, and she believed in keep the family together, and she believed in some of these practices. And I would be thinking, oh my goodness, she is out there doing this work, and she's at the top of the agency. And that's why they were forcing her to go get a bachelor and then a master's because
Substantiate her position.
Yeah, because she had been promoted beyond her credentials, let's say, right? So the agency was saying, we want to help you, but at the same time she was resistant because she'd been doing things a certain way that could have been racist, classist, sexist, homophobic, da-da-da-da-da, and
rather than changing those beliefs, she'd rather just be stubborn and say that, and just dismiss them entirely.
Right, her privileges were not challenged in the roles she'd had. She'd been promoted, and I thought to myself, and I still do every time I think of her, how much harm might she have been doing over those years where she was responding to situations where she really was not fully equipped with the best knowledge, best practice, feminist insight, structural social work, indigenous ways, trauma-informed, all these good things that we're doing. And
intersectionality,
and because it was a northern context, she hadn't had colleagues to ongoingly upgrade with. She was the voice, she was the boss, right? So when I was challenging her in class, it was really
triggering her.
It was triggering her, and it was splintering her. It was giving her uncomfort because she was thinking, if she accepted the truth I was offering, she would then have to look back at different moments in her career and think, oh, crap.
Absolutely.
Right? So she didn't want to face any shame or embarrassment in her own psyche about bad moments. And so rather it was easier for her to try and shut me down and blame me for being radical, or you're a feminist, well, whether I'm a feminist, that's why I said that story earlier, whether I'm a feminist or not, you should not be interviewing the 3 small children in a room for the first time with the father in the room who you suspect may have been abusing him. This is not good practice, no. And then she could yell at me and say, yeah, well, you're a feminist. Well, perhaps I am or not. But you should best practice this, right? So
out of that terrible situation, new policy guidelines were put in place. So, and it did take the newbie coming into the building to call out the situation, right? And luckily, I was involved in an agency that wanted growth.
Right.
That's
part of why they hire you. So, right, so let's kind of end our video here on a Friday on a good note. That the good news is people like you and me and Carlene and Tuba, we are out there in the world. We are coming to these agencies and moments and contacts with a lot of
high hopes
and power and enchantment and knowledge that we can bring to the knowledge.
Make a difference too.
We can make a difference. We do have ethical platforms. So memorizing or keeping a copy of your ethics right here, but then also the really wise practices of when something happens, make notes. make notes separate from what's on your computer.
Absolutely.
Because they can also walk you out of the building with 1 minute's notice.
And
So
I've had that happen.
keep it in your journal. Keep it in your. This is my. We had a whole video on journaling. This is my journal, and I'm always for 22 years or something. Every single day I write things down, and this goes home with me. I have 2 or 3 sheets of paper every day that are in my purse, and on my lunch I might make notes or whatever. And you might be amazed when something comes back, something from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 days ago. And if you've been empowering yourself with the information and always and being extraordinarily and let's say outrageously optimistic, was there a person in the stairway who witnessed this? Was there another colleague in the agency? Maybe you got hired precisely because someone on the board of that agency is wishing for the agency to make changes.
Yeah.
But they can't do it because they're over here.
Right.
But they're, let's be on the hiring committee to hire someone like Shelley who'll come in and start disrupting these old ways of being. Right? So you might be like, oh, why does this hurt so much? That's your joy and fabulousness when you retire and you're in a nursing home somewhere. You and me are like, hey, you know what I just heard about? This agency just hired an Indigenous woman as the executive director.
Exactly. Exactly. Sometimes
Right?
you gotta wait for your prize.
You gotta wait
right?
for your prize, your joy, your marvelousness. And then
And,
the younger women out there, younger people out there, we know we can share these stories and they can take that. Because I didn't have stories. When those tough moments happened to me, the first few times, I was just, wow, what is it about me that I'm such a sissy, that I'm incompetent, that I have poor judgment, that I overreact, right?
I'm the problem.
I'm the problem. But hopefully, through these kinds of videos and through these courses and through the work that we do, Carlene's generation can go forward and say, no, and make it different. And we can kind of feel, the way we right now often feel vicarious traumatization. We can feel vicarious glorification and joy, like,
Pride.
and pride. Kind of, we help put that into the world that it could be done better, and Carlene is out there doing it better. And you folks are out there doing it better.
When I was 17 years old, I helped a hotel that had a restaurant and rooms unionized. 17 years old. I lost my job. I was fired. my first.
You see what? I love her. She's been fired so many times. It's fucking awesome.
But I lived, every time I drove by that building, this in Fort Nelson, every time I drove by that building, I had a sense of satisfaction that I knew the union lasted 10 years in that building.
Yeah.
That means 10 years of less sexual harassment, 10 years of better wages, 10 years of no abusing shifts, and just the weirdo things that were happening at the time. So I have experienced and felt a great deal of satisfaction knowing that what I did left a legacy of some sort.
Legacy.
Right. They sold the building, got rid of the union, but it didn't devalue my experience.
Yeah, you made some
right?
progress on something, and that's all we could. Sometimes we can't anticipate a total worldwide revolution. We can maybe dream it, but we make little progresses, little moments, little betters, make it better. This is better than it was before. And all of us, that's what we're here for. And the 100 years of social work profession before us tried to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
We're in a big trajectory. All the movements.
Let's just keep on going, right?
Keep
Let's
on
just
going.
keep on doing what we're doing,
What
right?
we doing. So thank you very much for watching our video on social work and ethics, family counseling and ethics, social work with victims of abuse and ethics, and how to rise above it and find your optimism and your awesomeness. Thank you very much, Shelley LeBreton from Innovative Social Work for dialoguing with us today. Thank you, Carlene, our representative from the psychology profession. And happy everything.